Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Dr. Sarah Abosh Jacobson, the Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer here at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And today you are here to listen to the final Survivor Speaker Series program of the summer 2024. Today you will hear from Mr. Bert Romberg, who is at the side of the podium. Bert was born in Astheim, Germany in 1930. And in 1938, his mother planned for the family to escape to England by obtaining a visa for herself and securing spots for Bert and his sister Maggie on the Kindertransport, which was a rescue mission that allowed thousands of Jewish children and some non-Jewish children to live with English citizens. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Summer Survivor Speaker Series, Dallas After School, the Legacy Senior Communities, the SMU Human Rights Program, and the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. We are grateful for your support of the museum and our programs. We couldn't do these kinds of programs without your assistance. I would also like to extend a special welcome to our board members, and volunteers in the audience, some of whom I was speaking with on the way in. We couldn't fulfill our mission without you. If any of you who are here today are interested in becoming museum members or volunteers, please visit our website at dhhrm.org to learn more, and you can sign up there, and you can also have a lot of your questions answered. In just a moment, Bert will share his story with you, then we'll have time for questions and answers. If you're joining us in person today, you should have received a little index card and a golf pencil. So as you're listening to Bert, please feel free to write down any questions that you might have. And when he wraps up his remarks, we'll have staff come around, so just raise your hand with the card in it and we'll pick those up. If you're joining us online today, please look at the bottom of your screen and you'll see the Q&A button there. And if you click on that and type your questions in, we'll get those as well. So we'll filter those in, and Bert will answer as many of those as he can at the end of his remarks today. I now request that you all silence your phone. For those of you who don't know how to do that, turn to the young man or woman to your side and ask them to help you. Please also refrain from recording the presentation. We are, in fact, recording it, those two green eyeballs floating in the middle there, and we will be posting this up on our YouTube channel in the near future, so you'll be able to watch this again. And now it is my great pleasure to turn things over to Bert Romberg.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Good. Okay. I'm going to tell you the story of my first 15 years on this planet. From the time I was born in Astheim, Germany, until we landed in New York. This is one of the few happy stories, very few, or comparatively few, because the years in between were filled with a horrendous event, the Second World War, and all the tragedies and atrocities that came with it. Fortunately, our mother, my sister, and I, we got out just ahead of those tragedies, and we spent the war years in England and then came here at the end of World War II. But before I start on this story, I wanted to sort of parallel it with what is going on in today's world. What happened in Germany and in Europe because of Germany was the result of a population that was unhappy because of economic circumstances. They were the, quote, losers in the First World War, and I don't really believe that there are any victors, because even the victors lose a lot. It's just that the Germans lost more in that war, so they were called the losers. But because of that, their economy stalled, And certainly in the 20s, in the 1920s, the average German family had severe problems, and many of them so severe they didn't have sufficient food even to feed their kids. So for such a dissatisfied and unhappy population, it wasn't hard for a charismatic group with a very charismatic leader promising to make their country greater again, that they would follow him if he kept some of those promises, and he did keep some of them. And he built up a war machine that gave them food on the table, so they were happy with that. Having accomplished that, it allowed him to take terrible liberties. And eventually he took over this country, this Germany, and led it into a war in which, in Europe alone, maybe 50 million people died, of which 6 million didn't die because they were participants in the war. They were slaughtered because they were Jewish. Now, 6 million, and I won't tell you how lucky and how fortunate or how coincidental it is that a few of us got out. And in that few are the Kindertransport, some 10,000 kids. We came along with them, sister and I, but the enormity of that event I'll demonstrate in a little exam that I give children when I have school kids to talk to. 10,000 kids in an event that killed 1.5 million Jewish kids out of 6 million Jews that were slaughtered by the Nazis. So 10,000 in a fraction over 1.5 million is 10,000 is 4 zeros above and 0.0006 down below. And if you rationalize that, which I think, young lady, you can probably do because you're still in school, it means 1 over 150. And it means one child got out, or one child survived, while 150 died in the next 6 years. That's the reason I said we are, sister and I, lucky kids. So here I'm going to start telling you the story of one lucky kid. I was born in Astheim. Astheim is that little, this map shows you on that blue line is roughly the journey that we took from Astheim till we left the United Kingdom in the top left corner to go to the United States. Astheim, a little village, maybe 200 families, maybe less. It's bigger now, but the picture on the bottom right and the house on the bottom right is the house that my sister and I were born in. It's the house that our grandfather built. And if you look up under the gables, you'll see his initials, B.R., Benjamin Rothschild. He built that house sometime early in the 1900s. And down below in German, I'll read it to you. I'll read it to you in England, but in English, here's the translation. Greetings from Astheim. This postcard from 1910 shows the old Main Street with Silchen House, Rothschild Romberg, later called Drugstore Greenwald, and today is owned by Werner Schernick and Anna Schernick. The Schernicks were the house next door. They were the town butchers. And my grandfather ran his business out of the house that you'll see on the main floor, and we lived above. In any event, he arrived there sometime in the early 1890s, and by the time he was 20, in his early 20s, he had prospered enough to build that house. So you can tell that we came out of a solid middle class environment. Astheim itself is located, you'll see on the map, if you know anything about German geography, it's located at the junction of the Rhine, the big north-south river in Germany, and the main East River. And this little village lies in the armpit of the junction of those rivers. It was very, very wealthy or very healthy farming country. And we grew everything there from grapes to goats. So during the Depression, the 1920s, Astheim was self-sufficient, far different from much of Germany. So we didn't feel deprived, and our neighbors didn't feel deprived, and we had a very comfortable life there until the early 1930s. My parents were born in 27. I think that's their wedding picture. The 29 that you see up above has to be corrected. And we'll do that. But anyway, that's the wedding picture in the backyard of our house there. There were some 40 people attending. This is just our family and nearby relatives. And then some of the villagers were best friends of our family, and they came. But of this picture is in 1927. By 1942 or 43, I think only 4 or 5 of these people were still alive. That will give you a personal idea of what happened. But we, mother, sister, and I escaped. So Maggie was born in 1929. 2 months later, Grandpa, who built this family, died. 2.5 years later, our father, Alfred, died. So my mother was a widow from 1933 or 1932 actually, until 1974 when she died. So what happened in succession from 1932, a democratic election in Germany, because Germany was a republic with a constitution modeled after the American Constitution, with one exception. It was parliamentary. Voting and elections were modeled after America, but a parliamentary system modeled after England and France, where they had a president, a substitute for in England, the king, very much like you have a president in France right now, and a president of Israel, but the actual power and the ability to make law rested with a parliamentary organization called the Reichstag. The election in 1932 resulted in a dead heat. And in that situation, the Constitution was written that the president would elect or select a high-ranking member of one or more of these parties to temporarily lead the Reichstag, their parliament. He had 60 days, during which time Parliament, or the Reichstag, would yea or nay his selection. And this is how Hitler, the charismatic character that I alluded to, ascended to the not the presidency, but to the leadership of the Reichstag, having not won a plurality in the election. So in very quick order, he had 60 days. It didn't take him 60 days. Somehow the Reichstag building caught fire after a few days. And in the panic that ensued, Mr. Hitler said, I have to go after these guys. Whoever set fire, they are revolutionaries or whatever. And Germany being, or at least the power in Germany, being afraid of communism, which was not far to the east of them, they gave him what he asked for. He asked for an enabling act, which enabled him to act without their permission on anything. So he quickly enacted, or had Parliament, forced Parliament to enact the following authorities as they affected us. He, as do many dictators or politicians, when they have problems or when their population have problems, find a scapegoat. And it was very convenient for him to point at the German Jewish population. He persuaded the German Jewish population that these Jewish people among you are traitors. However, he put it in many different phrases. He made the Jews the enemy of their state. And with that enabling act, within 2 weeks of taking power, 2 acts came about. The first was very easy to understand. No Jewish child will attend a public school. The second, not so easy to understand and not so easy to translate, but in effect it says, you good German citizens, you have these Jews among you. They've been stabbing you in the back. They've been robbing from you, and that's the reason you are so impoverished. We have to push them aside, get rid of them, make them leave us. So if you are doing business with them, or if you have to do business with them, pay them as little as possible. And if you owe them money, try not to pay them back. And we, which is now the Parliament, which in effect was his party, now running the country, will see to it that no judge, no jury, no policeman, no prosecutor will take a case against you. And with that act, the German Jewish population lost all its civil rights because we had no appeal to any legal authority for what anybody wanted to do to us or with us. So this happened in 1933. Grandfather had died 3 years earlier. My father died 1 year after that. And our mother was stuck with two little snot-nosed kids to take care of, her widowed mother to take care of, and the business to take care of, because her three siblings had already married and moved away into other communities. She was the last one at home. So going back to that map, you'll see along that blue line a town called Eschwege. On the right side of that map, it's about 50 miles north of Astheim, where our aunt and uncle, my mother's next older sister, lived. It was a rather larger town. It was, in fact, a city, a market center, and it was big enough to have a Jewish community that had its own schools, so that she felt, at least she felt much more comfortable among a larger Jewish community, not as isolated by a hostile non-Jewish community, and had some idea that her children would be able to get some education. So we got there in 1935 and stayed until 1939. During that time, we had probably 2 years of sort of peace. In fact, these pictures you see, the bottom right, well, no, these are Astheim pictures. The top one is probably taken when we got our passport pictures in England. But here, this one, that's an apartment house where my mom got us an apartment. That's Sister Maggie, and that's me. And it had to be my first day in school in Eschwege, because you see that nice white shirt with a big collar and a cravat. And I had my hair is combed, and they probably cleaned my ears, but it's typical uniform that a new first day school kid gets. So that was Eschwege, a year, 1935, 1936, 1937, we began having real problems. By then, the Nazi Party had established itself. There were party captains on every block. There were anti-Semitic publications and posters on every street and in every newspaper. And on our way to and from school, and Maggie remembers this much better than I do, we were accosted. The neighborhood kids who should have been our friends became our enemies, and they were bullying us and throwing our books in the gutter and stealing our lunch pails, etc. Nothing to be done about it, because the policeman on the block probably egged them on. And it became steadily worse until in 1938, the Kristallnacht event. This was a one night, 36 hours, sponsored by the Central German government, the party, but occurred in every town, in every city, every town, every district, a plundering, pillaging of Jewish property, Jewish houses, Jewish businesses, Jewish apartments getting ransacked. And the worst part of that event was during that night, Kristallnacht, Jewish men, 18 and older, some tens of thousands, were kidnapped and taken to the first of the concentration camps. It was a terrible event. It horrified the international community. It terrified the German Jewish community. And Jews lined up at whatever consulate they could find to get permission to go to wherever some country would let them in. And some countries did, but most didn't, because they also still had their own problems with depression. They was still effects of the deep depression, recession, and they didn't want refugees taking their jobs. A story similar to what you're hearing or have heard here the last few years. So we would have been stuck with one exception: the Kindertransport. Kindertransport translates, kind is a German word for child, Kinder is its plural, children, and transport is the word you know, it's motion. So it's the motion or the shipment of children. And 10,000 of us got out this way. It was organized by a Christian, small Christian sect in England, helped by some wealthy Jewish non-profit social societies who appealed to Parliament. They heard and they saw in their newspapers what was going on in Germany. We got to help it out. He said they applied for Jews to come from Germany and from Austria and Czechoslovakia to come to England, but Parliament said no. We also have our problems. Parliament in England was by then controlled by labor unions, and England was the first of the great trade union countries. And members of Parliament reasoned if we let refugees in without asking any questions, they'll flood us and we'll lose our jobs, and next election we'll be out of here. But the Quakers, more than the rest of the people, insisted and got a bargain, the best they could get. Parliament said, you can let children in, no questions asked, because they're not going to take our jobs. And in the short period from the time they got that permission in December 1938 until August 1939, they organized trains that brought kids to England, 10,000 of us. So here we are in England, and we got there in end of May 1939 and early August 1939. World War II broke out, and no correspondence, no travel between the continent and the British Isles. The English Channel separated them. So we were in England and hosted or greeted by, and coincidentally, because our mother had gotten a visa. This is a side story, but it's the important story. in that wedding picture, there was a cousin that actually got to England in 1934. He brought money with him, established himself in business, was quite successful, and had corresponded all along with our mother, and got a visa for her, on which was also Maggie's name and my name. And the visa, and I will show it to you later, but it reads, Mrs. Romberg, if you come to England, you will only take occupation, and you have to work, you will only accept occupation as a domestic household worker in a household, meaning you'll be a housemaid. You can't take any other job. And with that in mind, Mama said, well, let's see if we can get on the Kindertransport. And she did, put us on, and she came along on the same train. We think as a chaperone. There were chaperones on that train, but they didn't have a British visa. She did. So she got to stay there. And she's the hero of this whole story. Common sense, courageous lady. So we got to England, and shortly afterward, for 2 nights, I think they put us up in some kind of hostel, a youth hostel, big hall with cots. And I can barely remember, but Maggie remembers much more clearly, social workers, adults, walking around between these cots, taking us to the bathroom, bringing us some food. And after 2 days, they came to us and they said, you're Romberg, your number so-and-so on the transport. Come with us, we found a place for you. And they found foster families for both Maggie and I in a town called Coventry. It's actually a city in the center of England. You can see it up there. It was, at the time, and may still be, the motor city of England, a very heavy manufacturing complex that made all the trucks and the cars and whatever, very much like Detroit. So there we were, and Maggie's host or foster family was a family called Simon, Jewish family who had children a little bit older than she, but they didn't treat her all that well. In fact, she got there when she was not quite 10. By the time she was 11 and a half, she was in effect their housemaid, doing their bathroom and their laundry and whatever, despite having their own kids, much older or older and certainly more capable. But she survived because the Simons, like other foster families, kept the bargain that the Quakers had made with Parliament, that any child they bring in will not become a burden on the British Treasury. That the Quakers would see to it that that child would be clothed, educated, fed, and housed at some cost to somebody, but not to the British Treasury. So that was Maggie's host family. She lived there 4.5 years. On the other hand, I landed with a non-Jewish family, the Shepherds, who took me in and just embraced me. They were so kind to me. Give you an example. I hadn't been there. They had 2 children. Peter, probably 1.5 years, 2 years older than me, and Mary, another 2 years older than me. So by that time, I was turning 9, and she would have been 13. and she was assigned to teach me English, because I didn't, poor, 9-year-old dumb German kid, I couldn't really talk English, and they couldn't talk any German. But she stood me up against near their fireplace, and every morning she would drill me in English. And the first thing she showed me was the clock they had above the fireplace, that they kept 10 minutes fast. And that's the first English sentence that I figured out, because she said, now remember, this clock is 10 minutes fast. And here I said, oh, you can put these words together and make sense. From that time on, I learned English. And Maggie had the same experience. No ESL, no German contact at all. And in short time, I'm saying weeks, because the Shepherds and the Simons, they sent us to school. We were fluent in English and beginning to forget German, because we had no contact with any of our friends or relatives who spoke German. So we became English kids. And for me, it was a wonderful experience. And even during the war, when Coventry was severely blitzed, it was the first of the blitzes. And when I have school kids here, I tell them the blitz. Young lady, do you know what a blitz is? It's not a football play, okay? It's a saturation bombing. And the German Luftwaffe believed that they could disable England's war effort, and started with Coventry, the town that produced so much of these goods that would be used in fighting. Anyway, Coventry suffered 3 major blitzes. We survived them, and Coventry eventually survived them, but it wasn't very comfortable. What was even less comfortable was Britain was pretty well isolated after the Germans overran most of Europe and then went into the Atlantic Ocean with their U-boats. And England, being an island nation, depending on its colonies or imports for most of its food. The war started for England in 1939. America didn't get involved until 1941, the end of 1941. By then, Britain was beginning to starve. And it wasn't until America in 1941, with its Lend-Lease program, managed to send substantial quantities of food besides war goods to help out. So we were pretty severely rationed. And the Shepherds shared their rations with me, and Simons did with Maggie. So here we are. So during the war, we had no contact with anybody on the continent. So here's what transpired. If you see this little smaller map in the bottom left, the red is Germany as it stood before the war, but then to the east you see France, and to the west you see France and the English Channel and the Netherlands, and then to the east Poland, Hungary, and all these countries through the Ukraine into Russia. Germany very quickly overran those countries, and instead of 450,000 Jewish German population, they were in control of 8 million Jews in the rest of that huge territory. And of those 8 million, 6 million did not survive. The big yellow sheet that you see behind that map, on the top you see the word Abmeldung, and it's dated March 1939. Abmeldung is a German word. It's made up of 2 big words. Ab is the word off, away, and Meldung is notice. So it's an official notice of departure. And in the bottom right, you'll see their signatures. One is my mother's signature. Below it is the signature for the police chief and the mayor of the town. And it's by this time, the Nazis had taken over or had taken such tight control of the country, and this was slightly before the World War broke out, that you needed as a citizen, whether you're Jewish or not, a travel certificate, which is the Abmeldung. It shows that Mrs. Romberg, who was born Rothschild, and it gives details of where she came from, and that she's a housewife, and her date of birth, Astheim, etc. And that is, she plans to go to London from Eschwege. She needed this permission, but I'm showing it to you because something else happened to the Jews in Germany that is sort of an indication of what was to come. In the second column, you see the name, her name, my mother's name was Sida, S-I-D-A. And next to it is the name Sarah. Okay? And then below that is Maggie's name. Her name was Margaret, and next to it is the name Sarah. And my name is Berthold, and I'm called Isaac, Itzchak. And the Germans came out with the regulation, you Jews are all the same, and we're going to give you Jewish names to make sure the rest of the population recognizes you. So every female, whether it's your baby sister or your grandma or your Aunt Gertie, is now called Sarah. And every male, whether it's your baby brother or your Uncle Joe, you all are called Isaacs, Itzchak. This is the beginning of the demeaning, of the gradual degrading of the German Jewish population by the Nazi-controlled Germany. And it begins to answer how they could do this and get away with it. And little by little, they built up the concentration camps, and they made us wear stars. And eventually, the tattoos, and eventually, when you're only a number, which is on your tattoo, you're just another piece, like a piece of cordwood. And killing you becomes easy. Not only do you have no more identity, you're not worth anything. You're just a commodity. And the reason I'm here telling you this, and the reason this wonderful museum exists, is the question: how can the most civilized country in the world at the time, the greatest musicians, the finest poets, the most advanced scientific community, the Goethes, the Schillers, the Einsteins, how can they produce a nation, 60 million people, of killers? That's the question. And that's the reason we're here telling you this. I'm telling you a very nice story, but underlying it, we have to learn something from this. And mine and my sister's is one of the few good stories. So these are some of the techniques, or this is the beginning of the way the Germans were able to do this. And they started, and we have a name for it today, the big lie. They managed to lie their way into this manipulation of their population, so that millions of people vanish, die. They don't ask any questions, they just follow, and that's it. Anyway, proceeding with my story, you see these pictures of the Kindertransport. The top left is probably the train station at the port, the ferry port, the ferry terminal to England, and the kids are being led from the train station across probably to the ship. And the picture on the right, where you see this guy with a big helmet, that's arrival in England. And we know it's England because that's a British bobby who at the time were required to be at least 5'10". They were the tall men pulled out of the population to be their policemen, and that's a particular helmet. So here are these kids. These are older that you see here. They had tags with names on them, with numbers on them. And you see the bottom left, which is sort of typical, would be about what Maggie and I would look like. But that's a file photo, that's not ours. So that's how they recognized us on arrival in England at the hostels, where they found, figured how to send whom where. And then as the war progressed, these are signs of those pictures of blitzed communities. You'll see at the bottom children from a family sitting with the house destroyed around them. The picture above, houses are still smoldering. Then the notice you see on the right, that official piece of paper, is part of the Private Chattels Act. It's dated 1941. The act is dated 1941, but this is signed in, this is date stamped middle July 1942. What it is, it's an act from the British government. They produced this act to compensate private parties whose property had been destroyed by the bombing, by the German bombing. And the house that my mother found a job as a maidservant, a rather larger house north of London, was destroyed in the Blitz. And this is telling my mom that they realized she lost a lot of her belongings when this house was destroyed. And they had advanced her, at the bottom right, you'll see the calculation, £9, 10 shillings were already advanced, and then they are now estimating that she lost 50, or they're compensating her with £54 17 shillings and sixpence. So they still owe her £45, 7 shillings and sixpence. This was in 42. We got there in 39, so it's 3 years, during which time she had not been allowed to enter the normal workforce. But it also coincided with the English realizing they had these refugees now as they were hosting them, and they were legally there, but they were not allowed to work. But their real workforce was in the Army or the Navy, whether it's men or women, they needed workers. So with this money, this £45, and at the same time they let her go to work in a as a sewing machine operator in a factory that made garments for the Army, uniforms. This £45 probably equated to 2 months' salary at least. And she had money to come and visit her little boy in Coventry, first time in 3 years. But then she got this job, and coincidentally, in 42, she realized I was getting on for my bar mitzvah, which is in 43. I hope most of you know what a bar mitzvah is, but for those of you who don't, very quickly, it's probably the Jewish equivalent of a confirmation. It's when a child reaches 13, he or she are eligible to join the adult community. And for that, we need to learn from the Hebrew Bible long stretches of Hebrew instruction, which takes some study and takes a teacher. And then on or near our 13th birthday, we recite those Hebrew verses to our congregation. And it's a very joyous event in a Jewish family. But I was in Coventry with no contact, although the shepherds early on sent me to synagogue and to Hebrew school, but the Blitz destroyed the center of Coventry, the synagogue. With it, the rabbi probably became an army chaplain, and the Hebrew teacher probably became a lance corporal, but there was no Jewish education. Mother went to the Jewish Aid Society and asked if they could find a place for her little boy to learn for his bar mitzvah. And they did. They found a place at the Jewish orphanage, a very prestigious small orphanage supported by wealthy Jewish families, a London institution. It was evacuated from London to get their kids out of the Blitz to Hertfordshire. Hertford, actually, the capital of Hertfordshire, a county north of London. And I transferred there in 1942, early 1942, after I'd been with the Shepherds for 3 years in Coventry. And I spent the next 3 years in Hartford. And the first of those 3 years with the Jewish orphanage, where I learned from my bar mitzvah and became bar mitzvah. But then lucky Bert Romberg got a real break. The orphanage, being a London-based operation was governed by the London County Council, a very wealthy county, and that county annually sponsored competitive scholarship exams for children who were 11 or 12, and again 15 or 16. And the few children who qualified became eligible to join the British grammar school system, which was a system of privileged private schools with some support from the government, and particularly from strong, wealthy counties, the first step in the English university system. And I was lucky enough to take that exam when I was early on, 12, and 2 weeks later found out that I'm the second kid in the history of the orphanage to get such a scholarship. And I immediately transferred to the Battersea Grammar School. So I had my secular education at a grammar school and my Hebrew education at the orphanage, both now evacuated to Hartford, where again I'm lucky, very lucky. I land with a family called Pettit, because the orphanage in London had its own dormitories, but in Hartford had to farm its kids out on foster parents. And the Pettits also treated me very, very well. Harold, the man, was asthmatic, so he was not drafted. He was a grocery store checker, sort of, you would call him here. And Gwen, my foster mother, she was a part-time seamstress, laundress, whatever, and they took care of me. Wonderful care. It was such a good experience for them and for me. They had an infant child, and I became his babysitter. And when I left, they eventually ended up fostering 3 boys, because I guess they had such good experience with me. I stayed in touch with them until fairly recently. The boy that I babysat for, Ben, I corresponded with him. I then corresponded with his child via email. And then that child, Georgie, he got married, and I think his wife said, "Oh, don't mess around with this old fogey in America." So he dropped the correspondence, but it was a wonderful experience. So I came to, we are now progressing my 4th, 5th, and 6th year in England. 1945, my mother had found employment in the garment factory. Maggie stayed with the Simons until she was almost 15. After 4.5 years, and then moved to London because compulsory education stopped at 14, and on the 15th birthday, unless you're lucky enough to get a scholarship or your parents are wealthy enough to send you to a grammar school, unless that happens, you too are in the workforce. So Maggie moved to London and became a 16-year-old dental assistant, or probably no more than sweeping out a dentist's office. But that's when her education stopped. but it's just when mine started. And then because my mother's oldest sister and family had gotten to New York in the 1930s, they established a visa for us and vouched to the American government that we would not become wards of the state, that they wouldn't see that see to our welfare. We got a visa and managed to catch a ship, or the Jewish Aid Society found a berth for us on a Canadian troop ship. It was an English luxury liner converted to carrying Canadian troops to and back, or they're mostly wounded, back to Canada. And we found a berth on that ship. And I don't know who paid for it. I think the Aid Society did. And we landed in Halifax in April 1945, just before the E-Day, and made our way from Halifax to Montreal to New York. In Montreal, we changed trains, and there was a cadre of nice Jewish ladies ready to feed us. So they gave Maggie and I bananas, which we hadn't seen in 5 years. And we gorged on bananas and got sick. But we remember it very well. And then we met up in New York. That's how we started out. So in 1945, we landed with $8 and 2 cardboard suitcases with old clothes. So here we are. Lucky Maggie. She had a tough time over there, but she survived. She has 2 wonderful grandsons. So I think you've about had it with me. So that's the story.
Thank you, Bert. We have a few minutes for some questions and answers. If you have written anything on your card, please just hold it up in the air. We have some staff who will be around to come and collect that from you. And in the meantime, Bert will get started with some questions that have come in from people who are watching this online, okay?
All right.
So the first question for you from online. As a child during the war, how personally aware were you of the Holocaust? Did the family that took you in keep you informed about events of the war?
If I heard that right, I personally, and I think we generally, had zero knowledge of how badly we were being, or our family was being treated. I think the Nazis, until the end, till maybe end of 1943 or 44, managed to either sugarcoat or hide this terrible story that they were putting together. But certainly I had no idea, not any.
Okay, thank you. When did you begin sharing your story publicly, and why did you begin sharing your story publicly?
Okay. I'm probably giving these kind of talks 15 years, maybe 16. Sister Maggie has been doing it for 30 in small location that the Holocaust Center had not so far from here, 2 blocks away. And she eventually persuaded me to give it a go. And it was because I was retired. I had, when I retired, I spent 8 years mentoring kids at the Arts Magnet School, Booker T. And after that, I took this on and did it fairly regularly. Okay? And they kept me because I worked for very little.
We'll double your salary. Bert, do you still speak German, and do you speak any other languages? Obviously, you speak English, so.
I speak English. I can understand Yiddish because Yiddish is largely based in German, and I can speak German. They tell me my German dialect is very, very good, but I'm short on vocabulary. My German vocabulary stopped as an 8-year-old, and when I speak to a German, he immediately realizes, he or she, that I'm short of words, so that I have to fumble for fill-in. I don't have a full dictionary. Okay?
Okay. What kind of life did your mother have after the war?
After the war? Mm-hmm. Well, after the war, we were here. She was a very experienced seamstress. She immediately got work in the garment center in New York City. I went to day school and got night jobs of all kinds. Maggie went to night school and got a day job with a dentist in New York. And we lived together for a while. Then Maggie got married, and Mother and I found ourselves a little furnished apartment until I got drafted. And then when I got drafted, she moved back with Maggie, who was married by that time. And she had a pretty tough time economically, but we were pretty poor. We looked for a big apartment or a bigger apartment, but nobody would give us credit. We didn't have a credit rating. So we rented month to month. And the reason I got drafted in the Army when Korea happened was because Mama had gotten ill and couldn't work for a while, and her employment benefits ran out. So I had to go to work and find a job and go to night school. Well, at that time, Korea had broken out in 50 and 51, and youngsters who were in college and taking a minimal amount, say 12 or 15 credit hours, they were deferred. Well, I'd switched to night school. I couldn't take 15 credit hours, so immediately the draft board got me. So that's when Mama moved Maggie and Harry took her in, and I was in the Army. Then when I came back, eventually I found a job. Eventually I got married, moved to Dallas, and they followed us. And that's when Mama had her best 10 years. We found our own apartment. We got her a credit card. She loved it, and she lived to see 5 grandchildren.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Bert. Have you visited Germany since you left? And if so, what emotions did you feel when you went back?
That's a question everybody asks me. I managed to catch a very good job, and we were major international traders, and I was responsible for a lot of that trade, and a lot of it with Germany. and I never went on business. I made the Germans come and see us. Until I found out that we had 4 cousins that survived in Germany because their father, my father's next younger brother, had survived. He'd married a Catholic woman. They had 4 children. So we went back to see that.
Okay. 2 more questions, Bert. Question 1, and this is a tough one. How can we fight anti-Semitism? I keep seeing it rise all around me. What can I do?
Tell them stories like mine. Tell them that anti-Semitism is another big lie. That there's no factual, no intellectual reason for it to be and shouldn't be tolerated. I don't know any other solution.
Okay. Final question. We have some young people in the audience today. What advice would you like to leave them with?
Vote.
But only when you're old enough.
Vote. Don't stay home. Go to the polls. If you need a ride to the polls, call me. Okay?
Thank you, Bert, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to ask if Bert will stay on stage for a few minutes, just in case anybody wants to come up and meet him, and wish you safe travels for the rest of your day. Thank you so much.